An eerie silence hung over the small courtyard behind the old church. A pale bride, her lace gown streaked with dust, leaned against a cold stone wall, trembling under the flickering light of a single street lamp. Her cheeks were stained with tears. Someone had torn away a section of her veil, leaving a rip that fluttered when the chilly night breeze passed through the narrow alley. Her eyes, wide and filled with shock, told of a grief so deep that she could hardly breathe. The men who were supposed to help with wedding decorations stood frozen by the side gate, too stunned to speak, as the news spread that the groom had fled moments before the ceremony. The faint echo of wedding music drifted from inside the church, mocking the new emptiness in her heart. When footsteps approached, she pressed her back to the wall, afraid that the next blow to her life would come from a stranger who had wandered into her personal heartbreak. But in that darkness, a tall figure emerged, offering a gentle presence instead of more pain. He did not speak right away. He saw her broken posture and reached out, hesitating before wrapping his arms around her. She sobbed, her cries echoing through the still night, the entire city unaware of her shattered life. Somehow, that first hug felt both comforting and surreal. She did not know who he was, only that a kind soul had found her in the worst moment of her life. A broken promise. Tessa Mayfield had never expected such a day. The morning had dawned clear and sunny. The first rays of light had filtered into her tiny apartment, illuminating the arrangement of white roses she had chosen for her special day. She was supposed to marry John Peterson, the man who had pursued her for months, insisted he loved her, and promised a lifetime of devotion. It had all felt like a dream, his strong voice pledging to take care of her, his gentle laughter whenever she joked that she was not pretty enough for him. He would look at her with starry eyes and claim that she was perfect in every way. Yet, as the wedding hour neared, a creeping worry had settled in Tessa's stomach. John was late, very late. Relatives and friends fidgeted in pews, glancing nervously at their watches. The officiant whispered to Tessa that it was okay to wait, that sometimes the groom needed a moment to compose himself. But time dragged on. The best man had vanished, too. Tessa's mother tried to calm her, smoothing out any wrinkles in Tessa's dress, but Tessa could see the concern in her mother's eyes. Then the unthinkable happened. A breathless usher rushed into the small dressing room where Tessa waited. The usher choked out the words she feared the most. "He's gone. We can't find him anywhere." Her world stopped. He was gone? Gone where? He had left no note, sent no explanation. The final text she had from him was a simple, "I love you," from the night before. Then nothing. A dull numbness settled over Tessa's mind. She could hear gasps from the wedding guests in the main hall, the soft shuffle of feet, and the unsettled whispers. Shame burned her cheeks, and she could not bear to face the crowd. She fled out the back, ignoring her mother's cries and the attempts of her best friend, Anna, to hold her back. Tessa rushed through the old church's side entrance and stumbled into the narrow alley behind it, where trash bins lined the walls and rusted ladders led up to grimy windows. It was there that despair finally crushed her. She sank to the concrete, the ruffles of her wedding dress collecting dirt and stains. Her tears fell so hard that she could not catch her breath. She held onto the tattered edges of her veil, trying to understand why the world had turned so cruel in an instant. That was the moment when a man, tall and well-dressed, walked out from the shadows. She did not notice him until he knelt beside her. Softly, he put a hand on her shoulder. She flinched, but his voice was calm, almost soothing. "It's okay," he said, though Tessa doubted anything was okay. She looked up, her tear-soaked eyes meeting dark, sympathetic ones. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice catching in her throat. He took a moment to answer, brushing a stray lock of hair from her face. "My name is Nicholas," he said simply. Then, with a careful motion, he offered her the comfort of a hug. Overcome by sorrow, Tessa let herself be pulled into his arms, her tears wetting his expensive suit jacket. She did not see the faint lines of worry cross his face, nor the way his jaw tightened as he took in the scene. He only held her, a stranger in a place of heartbreak. A comforting stranger when Tessa's sobs finally slowed. She noticed that the man's clothes looked quite fine. The fabric of his jacket felt softer than anything she had ever touched. His watch, glinting in the alley's half-light, was obviously costly, but she was in no state to question him. Her mind reeled from John's desertion, and all she could do was cling to the only warmth that had found her in the cold alley. After several long minutes, she drew a trembling breath and pulled back. Her tear-streaked face burned with embarrassment, but the man's expression showed only kindness. He reached into his coat pocket, producing a crisp, white handkerchief that seemed out of place in such a dingy setting. She dabbed at her eyes, wondering why this moment felt unreal. A bride sobbing in a dirty alley and a man with a polished manner offering comfort. It could have been a scene from a sad movie. Tessa could see the pity in his eyes. She wanted to turn away, to run and hide, but she had nowhere else to go. Everything she thought she knew about her future had been destroyed in an instant. "Thank you," she finally managed to say, her voice husky from crying. He nodded, his gaze never leaving her. "You don't have to thank me," he replied. "I only wish I could do more." His words were plain and carried no hint of judgment. Tessa did not know what to say. She looked down at her dress, the white satin now stained with dust and tears. Her life felt just as ruined. Nicholas stood up, adjusting his jacket, and then gently helped Tessa to her feet. Her limbs shook so badly that she almost collapsed again, but he steadied her. The warmth of his hand under her elbow was strangely reassuring. "Where can I take you?" he asked in a soft tone. "Your family might be worried." Tessa's heart twisted. She did not know how to face her family. She could not picture returning to the church, where everyone would see the empty aisle, the deserted altar. She shook her head. "I can't go back in there. Not now." Without another word, Nicholas guided her to the side exit, away from the church lights and watchful eyes. His presence offered a silent promise of safety. The few people who still lingered outside gaped at the sight of the bride leaving with a stranger. But Tessa was too numb to care, and Nicholas walked with such confidence that no one dared to stop them. Within minutes, they reached a sleek black car parked a short distance away. Nicholas opened the passenger door for her, and Tessa slid in, her gown rustling against the leather seat. She should have felt some fear. She was going off with a man she knew nothing about. But his kindness outweighed her fears in that moment. Nicholas went around to the driver's side and started the car with a low purr. He cast a glance at Tessa, who clutched the seatbelt across her dress. She looked like a child who had lost her way, and in a sense, she had. "Are you comfortable?" he asked, noticing how tense she was. She gave a small nod. "Yes," she whispered, hugging herself as though she might shatter. For a while, they drove in silence. Tessa found that the quiet soothed her, giving her space to breathe. The city lights blurred outside, turning into bright smears against her teary eyes. She felt hollow inside, as though a piece of her had been cut out. But there was also a strange calm in the knowledge that at least she was not alone in this moment. Next to her sat a man who had no reason to help her. Yet here he was, providing a shoulder to lean on. She managed a shaky breath. "I'm Tessa," she said, breaking the silence. Nicholas offered a small smile as he merged onto a main road. "It's good to meet you, Tessa. Although I wish it were under better circumstances." Her heart ached at that. A bride's wedding day was supposed to be a memory of joy. Now it was a nightmare she would never forget. She shifted, trying not to cry again. "It wasn't always like this," she said, her voice cracking. "He promised me forever." Nicholas gave her a quick, understanding glance. "You don't have to talk about it now, if it hurts too much." She swallowed hard, thankful for his gentle approach. At the same time, part of her longed to spill out every thought, every doubt, and every question that churned in her mind. But she could not speak yet. She needed time to gather the fragments of her shattered heart. The first steps away from Payne Nicholas pulled up to a quiet street where tall oak trees lined the sidewalk. The car slowed in front of a modest guest house with a warm glow spilling from its windows. He explained that he owned several properties and that one of them was a small inn run by a trusted friend. Tessa, half in a daze, only nodded. With steady hands, Nicholas parked. He then came around and opened her door, helping her out. Though the building was small, it looked cozy. The porch had a few rocking chairs, and a flickering light bulb revealed potted flowers at the entrance. The sign above the door read, Mayfair Guest House. Nicholas led her inside, where an older woman greeted them with a kind smile. She wore an apron, and the smell of freshly baked bread drifted through the air. Nicholas introduced her as Linda, the caretaker. Linda's eyes widened at the sight of Tessa's wedding gown and smudged makeup, but she kept her reaction controlled. "Oh dear," she whispered, her gaze flicking to Nicholas and back to Tessa. "Come in. You're safe here." Nicholas gently placed a hand on Tessa's shoulder. "Linda will get you set up with a room. I'll come back in the morning to see how you're doing." Something in Tessa twisted at the thought of being left alone, yet a new wave of exhaustion washed over her. She felt dizzy with grief and confusion. Perhaps rest was the only thing she needed right now. Linda guided Tessa up a creaking wooden staircase to a room at the end of the hall. A simple bed with a soft quilt stood in the middle, while a small closet and a reading chair took up the corners. It was humble but welcoming. "I'll bring you something to eat and some towels," Linda said softly, flicking on a bedside lamp. "You take your time." Tessa nodded. The words "thank you" stuck in her throat. After Linda left, Tessa sank onto the bed, the layers of her wedding dress billowing around her in a mocking swirl of white. She had dreamed of a wedding night filled with laughter and gentle romance. Now she was here, alone in a guest house she had never seen before. Her groom vanished into the night. She gently tugged off her veil, noticing the tear in the delicate fabric. It was the perfect picture of how she felt, ruined, incomplete, and beyond repair. She wondered if John would ever explain himself. What had changed his mind? How could a man who spoke of love so earnestly just run away? At that moment, Tessa had no answers. All she had were the tears that kept coming, the quiet walls of the guest house, and the memory of a stranger's protective embrace in the alley. The morning after night passed slowly. Tessa found bits of sleep between bouts of crying, but each time she closed her eyes, she saw John's face or replayed the moment she learned he had left. By dawn, she felt more numb than rested. Soft sunlight sneaked through the gap in the curtains. The room was now bathed in a gentle glow. Tessa forced herself to sit up, wincing as her stiff muscles protested. She had fallen asleep in her wedding gown. The material was wrinkled, and the decorative pearls dug into her arms. With a sigh, she stood and loosened the dress, letting it slip into a heap on the floor. Tears threatened again at the sight of it, but she swallowed them down. She needed to focus on the present, if only to make it through the day. Linda, hearing movement, knocked gently and entered with a soft smile. She set a small bag on the chair. "Nicholas arranged for some fresh clothes," she said. "You're about the same size as my daughter, so we went through her closet. I hope you don't mind." Tessa felt a surge of gratefulness. "That's very kind," she murmured, picking up the simple skirt and blouse. They were plain, but looked clean and comforting compared to the sad remains of her wedding attire. After a hot shower, Tessa felt somewhat more human. She dressed and brushed her still wet hair. Her reflection in the mirror showed a pale, puffy-eyed version of herself. She tried to smile, but it looked forced. At least she was alive, she reminded herself. Stepping into the hallway, Tessa followed the smell of bacon and coffee to a small dining area on the ground floor. She found Linda busy flipping pancakes, humming a quiet tune. With a friendly nod, Linda gestured for Tessa to sit. In front of Tessa lay a steaming mug of coffee and a plate of eggs. A few minutes later, the front door opened and footsteps echoed in the foyer. Nicholas appeared in the dining area. He had changed into a tailored shirt and trousers, looking polished and calm. A slight smile touched his lips when he saw Tessa. She felt an odd flutter in her stomach at his presence, a mix of gratitude and awkwardness. "How are you feeling?" he asked, taking a seat across from her. Tessa shrugged, staring at her plate. "I'm not sure yet." Nicholas nodded. "That's understandable." Linda placed a few pancakes on Tessa's plate, then left them alone. The sweet smell of maple syrup drifted between them. Tessa sipped her coffee, collecting her thoughts. Why had this man helped her so quickly? In stories, a bride left at the altar usually had to rely on friends or relatives. Yet Nicholas was practically a stranger. She decided to voice the question. "Why did you help me last night?" Nicholas looked at her, his expression thoughtful. "I was visiting the church to speak with someone about a charity event. I arrived late, and as I walked around the side, I saw you there. You looked broken." His gaze held genuine sympathy. "I just couldn't turn away." She let his words settle in the quiet between them. Then she asked another question. "Do you always keep a guest house on hand for random brides in distress?" That coaxed a soft laugh out of him. "Not exactly. The Mayfair Guest House is one of several properties I own. I like to invest in places that can offer comfort to people who need it." He paused, then added gently, "In your case, it seemed like the right thing to do." She studied him. "You must be quite wealthy." Nicholas shrugged modestly. "I've done well in my business, yes. But let's just say I believe in sharing what I have when it counts." There was no arrogance in his voice, only a casual acceptance of his situation. Tessa felt another pang, reminded of John's false promises. She used to think John provided the security and stability she needed in life. But all that had been a lie. Her eyes were drawn to Nicholas's watch again, the same expensive one she had noticed in the alley. She felt small and uncertain around him, a nobody who had been jilted in the worst possible way. Yet he treated her with sincere respect. She summoned the courage to say, "I can't stay here forever, you know. At some point, I'll need to face the mess." Nicholas set his mug down. "I understand. But you're not alone in dealing with that. Let me help you find a way forward. Whether that means talking to your family or figuring out your next steps, you don't have to handle it by yourself." Tessa felt her throat tighten. She recalled how John left her to deal with everything alone. Now, an almost stranger was offering her a helping hand. A wave of gratitude mixed with sorrow swept over her. She would never have chosen this path, but here she was. The last 24 hours had changed her life, and she had no choice but to keep moving forward. Facing the wreckage, it took Tessa nearly a week to gather enough courage to contact her family. In that time, she stayed at the guest house, trying to rebuild her shattered spirit. Linda fussed over her like a caring aunt, making sure she ate and slept. Nicholas visited each day, sometimes bringing food or flowers, sometimes just offering quiet companionship. They spoke in careful tones, never venturing too deeply into each other's personal histories. Tessa was still raw from heartbreak, and Nicholas seemed to sense she needed space. A strange bond formed between them anyway, a fragile thread of trust woven in the midst of sorrow. Finally, she worked up the nerve to call her mother. The phone felt like a ton of bricks in her hand. Her mother, frantic with worry, demanded to see her. Tessa tried to explain in halting sentences that she was safe and would come by soon. She just needed more time. With Nicholas's help, Tessa arranged to visit her parents' home, a modest place in the suburbs. That morning, he drove her there in the same sleek car, parking it in front of a small house with a white fence. Tessa's heart pounded, so loud she thought Nicholas could hear it. "Do you want me to come in with you?" he offered gently, turning off the engine. She hesitated, torn between wanting his support and feeling that her family might ask too many questions about him. Yet the idea of facing her parents alone brought a wave of panic. "Yes," she whispered, "if you don't mind." He gave an understanding nod. Together, they walked up the path, past the rose bushes her mother tended so carefully. At the door, Tessa paused, hand raised to knock. Before she could, the door flew open and her mother was there, worry etched on her face. "Oh, Tessa," her mother cried, pulling her into a tight hug. Tessa let herself be held, tears burning in her eyes. She felt both relief and pain in her mother's arms. Her father appeared behind her mother, his expression grim, but his eyes kind. "We've been so worried. We had no idea where you went after everything," he said, voice faltering. They ushered Tessa and Nicholas inside. The living room looked the same as always, well-worn couch, family photos on the walls, a vase of flowers on the side table. But the atmosphere crackled with tension. Tessa's mother glanced at Nicholas curiously, taking in his tailored clothes and polite manner. Tessa introduced him softly. "This is Nicholas. He found me that night." She left it at that for the moment, not sure how to explain everything else. Her father gave Nicholas a firm handshake. "Thank you for looking after my daughter," he said, voice catching. Nicholas offered a quiet nod. "I'm glad I could help." They all sat down, and for the next hour, the story was told. Tessa choked back sobs as she described how John had disappeared, how she had run out of the church in a panic, how Nicholas had taken her to the guest house and helped her piece together her broken spirit. Her parents listened, expressions shifting from anger at John to sadness for Tessa. They apologized for not running after her that day, but the chaos inside the church had been overwhelming. At some point, Tessa's mother placed a gentle hand over Tessa's. "We're just relieved you weren't hurt," she said. "We will figure out the rest. Do you have any idea where John went or why he did this?" Tessa shook her head, frustration mounting. No word, not even a message. She felt the sting of betrayal all over again. Her father's voice took on a hardened edge. "If I ever see that coward again, I'll..." Her mother shot him a warning glance. "Let's not talk about violence. We need to focus on Tessa. She needs to heal." Nicholas cleared his throat, drawing their attention. "I have some resources that might help us locate him, if that's what Tessa wants. But I don't want to overstep." Tessa glanced at him, uncertain. Did she really want to find John? Part of her longed for answers, but another part just wanted to move forward. The thought of chasing him felt exhausting. Nicholas came by nearly every evening. Sometimes they just walked side by side, not speaking. Other times, he would bring dinner from a restaurant downtown, and they would share the meal in the cozy parlor. He never pushed he-she side. "I'm not sure. I want to know why, but I'm also terrified of what he might say." Her mother nodded, pulling Tessa into another hug. "One step at a time, darling." A small measure of peace settled over them. Tessa realized that she had to let her anger cool and think carefully. At least her parents knew she was safe. They could start rebuilding their lives, piece by piece. When the visit ended, Nicholas asked if Tessa wanted to return to the guest house or stay with her parents. After some thought, she decided to go back with Nicholas. She was grateful for her family's concern, but she also needed space to figure out what she really wanted. The guest house had become her sanctuary, and Nicholas's presence, however strange their connection was, gave her a sense of security she could not explain. Shadows of the past days turned into weeks. Tessa avoided social media, fearing the pitying posts and endless questions about the wedding disaster. She spent her time taking quiet walks in the garden behind the guest house, journaling her feelings, and helping Linda with small tasks like washing dishes and folding laundry. Simple chores kept her mind from spinning out of control. Art to talk about John. In fact, he rarely spoke about himself at all. But Tessa observed small details about him. The way he stiffened when his phone rang, as though expecting bad news, or how he stared into the distance sometimes, lost in thought. Gradually, Tessa found herself curious about his life. She asked Linda about it one day while they were tidying up. Linda hesitated before saying, "Nicholas is a good man, but he has his own burdens." She left it at that, sensing Tessa's question, but not wanting to betray Nicholas's trust. That evening, Tessa worked up the courage to ask him directly about his life. They were sitting in the guest house garden, near a bed of blooming flowers. The sunset painted the sky a mix of pink and orange, and a light breeze rustled the leaves. She turned to Nicholas. "You've been so kind to me, but I don't know much about you. Do you always rescue strangers in wedding dresses?" A faint smile curved his lips. "You're my first," he teased lightly. Tessa returned the smile. "So what do you do, besides own ghost houses and drive fancy cars?" Nicholas turned his gaze to the horizon. He exhaled slowly before answering. "I run a group of companies that invest in real estate. I also sponsor a few charities that focus on housing for low-income families and orphans. I've been working on it for years." She could tell he was leaving out personal details. "Is that what you always wanted to do?" He shook his head, a distant look in his eyes. "Not exactly. When I was young, I lived in a cramped apartment with my mother. My father had left us, and she struggled to keep a roof over our heads. I decided early on that I never wanted to be in that position again. I wanted to help people who felt trapped or abandoned. The sincerity in his voice touched Tessa deeply. She could sense the pain behind his words. Though he had built a successful life, it was clear he carried old wounds. It made her feel less alone in her own heartbreak. She placed a tentative hand on his arm. "You've come a long way." He nodded, a thoughtful expression crossing his face. "Yes, but money doesn't solve everything. Sometimes we just need someone to say, 'I'm here for you.'" A lump formed in Tessa's throat. "That's what you did for me, and I don't know how to repay that." Nicholas turned to look at her, his dark eyes reflecting the fading sunlight. "You don't owe me anything. I've been where you are, in a way, alone and hurting. If I can spare someone that loneliness, I'll do it." A gentle silence fell between them as they watched the sun slip behind the rooftops. In that moment, Tessa realized how much she had grown to rely on Nicholas's calm presence. She felt closer to him than she had ever expected to feel with someone in such a short time. But as comforting as his company was, it also frightened her. She still carried the raw pain of John's betrayal. The idea of trusting another man, especially one so different from herself, seemed risky. Yet part of her heart was starting to stir, wanting to hope again. She closed her eyes and tried to steady her breathing, telling herself not to jump too fast. She was not ready to risk her heart again. Not yet. Unfinished business. Another week passed, bringing with it a sense of unease. Tessa's life had fallen into a calm routine at the guest house, almost as if she had always lived there. She found herself enjoying Linda's warmth and Nicholas's quiet strength. But one morning, an unexpected phone call rattled her. She was seated in the dining area, sipping tea, when Linda came in with the phone. "It's for you," Linda whispered, sounding concerned. Tessa took the phone, heart thumping. "Hello." A trembling voice came through the line. "Tessa, it's John." Her grip tightened. She opened her mouth to speak, but her voice caught in her throat. Minutes passed before she could say anything. "How dare you call me now?" she finally managed, voice shaking. He let out a heavy sigh. "I'm so sorry. I know you must hate me." Tessa stared at the wall, anger and heartbreak swirling inside her. "I don't even know what to feel anymore," she said in a low tone. "Why did you do it, John? Why did you leave me like that, without a word?" He hesitated. I got scared. I felt pressured. The wedding seemed like a huge step, and I started panicking about whether I was ready." Tessa forced herself to keep listening, though her eyes brimmed with tears. "And you thought running away was the answer?" "I'm sorry," he repeated, his voice cracking. "I was a coward. I couldn't face you or anyone else. I'm still trying to figure out my life. But I wanted to let you know that it wasn't your fault." The tears spilled over. "That doesn't make it hurt any less," she whispered. There was a pause. "I know. I wish I could take it back. I'm here in the city, and I want to talk to you. Please, just let me see you once to explain." Tessa's heart hammered. Part of her longed for closure, to look him in the eyes and demand a real explanation. Yet another part of her wanted to avoid all that pain. She wiped her tears with the back of her hand. I don't know. Please," he begged. "I'm staying at my cousin's place for a few days. If you're willing, meet me at the cafe on Maple Street tomorrow afternoon." She swallowed hard. Her mind raced, remembering all the sleepless nights she had endured, the heartbreak that had almost destroyed her. "I'll think about it," she said, her voice barely steady, and ended the call. For a long moment, Tessa stood there, staring at the phone in her hand. Anger, sorrow, confusion, everything swirled inside her. Linda gave her a sympathetic look, placing a hand on her shoulder. "You're not alone in this," she said softly. A surge of doubts later that day. Tessa found Nicholas reading some paperwork in the guest house parlor. He looked up the moment she entered, concern flickering across his face. "What happened? You look upset." She took a seat next to him, fighting back tears. "John called." Nicholas's jaw tensed slightly. "What did he say?" She explained the conversation, how John claimed he panicked, how he wanted to meet. Nicholas listened patiently, his brow furrowed. "Do you want to see him?" Tessa exhaled, shaky. "I'm not sure. Part of me wants answers. Part of me never wants to hear his name again." Nicholas set aside his paperwork. "If you think it will help you find closure, then do it. But if it's going to tear you apart again, you have the right to say no." Tessa studied the gentle concern in Nicholas's eyes. She found herself wishing she could lean on him forever, letting his strength protect her from the ugliness. But she knew she could not hide forever. She had to face her past before she could move on. "I'll see him," she said softly, nodding, as though trying to convince herself. "I need to understand." Nicholas placed a comforting hand over hers. "I understand. Do you want me to come with you? I could wait outside just in case." His offer filled her with relief. "Yes, please," she whispered. "I don't think I'm strong enough to face him alone." Nicholas's eyes softened. "You're stronger than you know, Tessa. But I'll be there." The cafe meeting the next afternoon felt like a slow march toward doom. Tessa chose a simple outfit, a pair of jeans and a light blouse, wanting to be comfortable and not dwell on appearances. Her hands shook as she tied her hair into a neat ponytail. Nicholas waited for her downstairs, wearing an expression that balanced calm with concern. They drove in silence to the cafe on Maple Street. Tessa's stomach churned with nervous energy. By the time they arrived, her throat was dry. The cafe was cozy, with large windows showing passers-by strolling along the sidewalk. Nicholas parked on a side street and turned to her. "I'll wait the car if you like. If you need me, call. I'll come in right away." She nodded, swallowing hard. The quiet support in his gaze steadied her a bit. "Thank you," she whispered, stepping out of the car. Inside the cafe, the scent of freshly brewed coffee mingled with the sweetness of baked goods. Tessa quickly spotted John in a corner booth. He looked thinner, his posture slumped, his gaze darting nervously around. When he saw her, he stood, uncertain, hands trembling. "Tessa," he breathed, eyes filling with regret. I'm so sorry." She lowered herself into the seat across from him, arms crossed protectively. "Say what you need to say," she replied, voice tense. He swallowed, then launched into a shaky explanation. He spoke of feeling unprepared for marriage, family pressure, and his mounting fears that he was not worthy of her love. Tessa listened, her heart twisting. His words were full of apologies, but they felt too late. "Why didn't you talk to me?" she asked, tears gathering at the corners of her eyes. "We could have postponed the wedding. We could have gone to counseling. Anything. But you disappeared." John lowered his head. "I'm a coward," he admitted, voice breaking. "I wish I could rewind time. If you can forgive me, maybe we can try again." Tessa's heart lurched. "Try again," she echoed. "Do you realize how devastated I was? My entire world collapsed that day." He reached across the table, but she pulled back. The memories of that awful night flashed through her mind, standing in the alley, crying in her soiled wedding gown. No idea what would happen next. And then Nicholas had appeared, offering kindness and stability. John, meanwhile, had offered nothing but an empty space where promises once lived. John's lips trembled. "Tessa, I know I hurt you. I'll do anything to make it right. I was lost before, but I'm ready now." She closed her eyes, steadying the raw ache in her chest. "I don't know if I can ever trust you again," she whispered. "You walked away from our life without a second thought. How do I know you won't do it again?" He shook his head desperately, but Tessa could see the guilt etched on his face. "I've changed," he insisted. "I'm seeing a therapist. I'm learning to handle my fears better." Tears escaped her eyes. She remembered the hopes she once pinned on him, the dreams of a happy marriage. Yet she also recalled the torment of that day, the shock and humiliation. She had barely picked up the pieces of herself since then, and part of her had begun to see a different future, one that did not include John at all. She let the tears fall. "I'm glad you're getting help," she managed. "But I don't know if I can do this." 1,000 images of Nicholas's kind face swam before her, though she did not speak his name. She thought of how he had helped her heal. John's face sank. Is there someone else? Tessa blinked, glancing away. I don't know if it's about someone else. I just know I can't go back to how things were. Not now. He slumped, defeated. Then, can we at least remain friends? Or maybe take it slow, see if we can build trust again. Tessa regarded him with a mix of sadness and pity. He seemed sincere, but the damage was done. I need time to figure out my life. Maybe one day we can speak again, but not now. John nodded, tears glistening in his eyes. They both sat in silence for a moment. Then he reached into his pocket, pulled out an envelope, and placed it in front of her. I wrote you a letter. It's everything I couldn't say in person. Read it when you're ready. Her fingers closed around the envelope. Thank you, she whispered, though she was not sure what to do with it yet. They parted ways in front of the cafe, the sun shining down in stark contrast to the heavy ache in Tessa's chest. She watched him walk off, shoulders hunched, and realized that she felt no sense of relief, only a dull sadness. But there was also a strange finality to it, a door that she could close if she chose to. She headed back to the car, where Nicholas observed her with careful concern. Are you okay? He asked gently. She gave a small nod, though her eyes stung with tears. I told him I can't go back to him. Not now, at least. Nicholas placed a soft hand on her shoulder. That must have been hard. She exhaled a shaky breath. It was, but I think it was the right thing. Without another word, Nicholas started the car, and they pulled away from the cafe. Tessa stared out the window at the world passing by, feeling that her life had hit a turning point. She might still be bruised from heartbreak, but she was not shattered anymore. And she was not alone. A spark of hope as the next few weeks unfolded. Tessa gradually found that the weight on her chest was lighter. She talked to Linda about her dreams before John came along, the ones she had shelved in favor of wedding plans. She had always wanted to teach art, to share her love of colors and shapes with children. Perhaps it was time to revisit that path. Nicholas noticed her improved mood and encouraged her. You have talent, he said one evening, glancing at the sketches Tessa had left on the coffee table. Why not teach art classes or find a way to volunteer at a local community center? The idea filled her with cautious excitement. She nodded, a smile tugging at her lips. I might do that. In the midst of this, Tessa began to see Nicholas in a new light. He was always there, ready to help but never pushing. She found herself drawn to his quiet confidence, his gentle heart. Yet she was also afraid. Falling for someone after being betrayed at the altar felt reckless. But the more she tried to deny it, the more her heart yearned for his company. One afternoon, Tessa was painting in the garden when Nicholas arrived with a file of documents in hand. He paused, watching her brush move across the canvas, capturing the softness of a nearby rose bush. A slow smile spread across his face. You have a gift, he said softly. She lowered her brush, cheeks warming. Thank you. It helps me relax. He set his paperwork aside and took a seat next to her, eyes still on the painting. I've been meaning to talk to you about something. Her heart thumped, wondering if he was going to address the tension that had been building between them. But Nicholas looked somewhat hesitant, as though choosing his words carefully. I've seen how much you care about art and about people, he began. I run a community center in another part of town, mostly for kids who need a place to study or stay off the streets after school. We've never had a real art program, but I've always thought it could help them. They need healthy outlets for their energy. Tessa's eyes lit up. That sounds wonderful. Nicholas smiled, relieved by her enthusiasm. I'd like you to help me start an art program there. I'll provide the funding and space, but I need someone who knows how to guide them. She blinked, excitement and nervousness colliding in her chest. This was a chance to do something meaningful, yet it was also a big responsibility. You trust me with that? He nodded firmly. I do. You have the heart and the skill. And the kids could benefit from someone who's found strength through creativity. Her eyes brimmed with gratitude. Yes, I would love to, she said, voice trembling with emotion. It felt like a new door opening for her, a chance to rebuild her life in a positive way. Nicholas's eyes sparkled. Then let's make it happen. Without thinking, Tessa leaned forward and wrapped her arms around him in a sudden hug. He froze for an instant, then returned it gently, careful not to disturb the wet paint. Her heart pounded, aware of how close they were. But it felt right, safe. After a moment, she pulled back, cheeks flushed. "Sorry," she mumbled. He chuckled softly. "Don't be." They spent the next hour talking about ideas for the art program, supplies, lesson plans, ways to inspire the children. The creative flow between them felt natural, and Tessa realized that she was genuinely happy. Not the forced happiness she had shown John in those last weeks of their engagement, but real contentment, sparked by a shared purpose. Whispers of attraction in the days that followed. Tessa and Nicholas grew closer as they worked on the community center project. They visited the center together, meeting children who would benefit from a program. Tessa's heart ached at their stories, many from broken homes, just trying to find a safe haven. Nicholas used his network to secure paint sets, paper, pencils, and even clay for sculpting. Tessa planned small lessons, starting with basic drawing and simple color theory. Watching the kids' faces light up when they created something new touched her in ways she had not expected. Through this work, she saw another side of Nicholas. He was a man who, despite his wealth, genuinely cared about uplifting others. The children, sensing his sincerity, flocked to him with excited chatter. Nicholas listened to them intently, kneeling down to their level, giving encouragement. Tessa could hardly look away, admiration swelling in her chest. One evening, after a busy day at the center, Tessa found herself alone with Nicholas in his car. He was driving her back to the guest house. The sun was setting, casting a warm glow over the skyline. "Thank you for letting me do this," Tessa said, her voice softly echoing in the enclosed space. He glanced at her. "You're the one making the real difference. I just opened a door." She smiled, heart fluttering. She wanted to tell him how much his belief in her meant, how it had helped her heal from the betrayal she once believed would break her forever. But words failed her. Then, at a red light, Nicholas reached over and gently brushed a strand of hair away from her face. Tessa's breath caught in her throat. Their eyes met, and for a moment, the world shrank to just the two of them. She felt an electric current race through her, a spark of something she dared not name. But the light turned green, and Nicholas refocused on the road, clearing his throat. Tessa's heart pounded wildly. She looked out the window, trying to calm the rush of emotions. A part of her wanted him to pull the car over and say how he felt. Another part was terrified of what that might mean. By the time they arrived at the guest house, they were both quieter than usual. Nicholas opened the door for her. She slipped out, adjusting her bag. "Good night," she murmured. He hesitated, then gently took her hand. "Tessa, he began, but then stopped, seeming unsure of his own words. Her pulse thundered in her ears. "Yes." He drew in a breath, looking at her face in the twilight. "You deserve happiness," he said finally, releasing her hand. "I hope you remember that." Something in his tone made her chest tighten. She longed to close the distance between them, to show him that maybe, just maybe, she could trust again and not be hurt. But a lingering fear of heartbreak held her back. She managed a small, tremulous smile. "Good night, Nicholas." He offered a faint nod, then turned, walking back to his car. Tessa watched him drive away, her heart full of contradictory feelings. She suspected that the bond between them was growing into something deeper. But was she ready to risk her heart a second time? A door to the future. A few weeks later, the art program was officially launched. Children poured into the community center with bright smiles, eager to learn. Tessa guided them through simple projects, praising their creativity. Linda even visited one day to see Tessa in her element, brimming with pride. Nicholas floated around, making sure everything ran smoothly. It was during this time that Tessa discovered how deeply she cared for Nicholas. Each moment they spent collaborating brought new layers of understanding and admiration. His patience, his generosity, his quiet sense of humor, all these qualities drew her in. She feared how vulnerable it made her feel, especially after John's betrayal. But as she got to know Nicholas, she found it increasingly hard to imagine her life without him. One evening, After the last child was picked up, Tessa and Nicholas stayed behind to clean up brushes and paint cups. The community center's lights glowed overhead, casting soft shadows on the walls. Tessa felt a pleasant tiredness from the day's activities. She rinsed a brush in the sink, noticing a streak of purple paint across her hand. Nicholas approached with a towel, smiling. "You missed a spot," he teased, gently wiping away the paint. She laughed softly, then glanced around at the now empty room. The walls were lined with the children's artwork, crayon drawings, finger paint masterpieces, clay figurines. The sight filled her with warmth. "Look at this," she said, gesturing to the displays. "We did this together." Nicholas nodded, his gaze traveling over the colorful art. "We gave them a place to explore their imaginations. That's priceless." A wave of affection washed over Tessa. She turned to him, heart beating fast. "Thank you," she murmured, "for everything." He looked into her eyes. "Tessa, I know you've been hurt. I know we've been taking things slow. But I can't hide how I feel anymore." Her breath caught. "What do you mean?" she asked, though she suspected she already knew. He set the towel aside, taking her hands in his. "When I found you in that alley, I saw someone broken by betrayal. But I also saw someone whose spirit was stronger than she realized. Over these weeks, working together, watching you grow and heal, I've found myself drawn to you. I didn't want to push, not after what you went through. But I think you deserve to know how much I care about you." Tessa's eyes flickered with tears. This was the moment she had feared yet longed for. Was she strong enough to give her heart to someone else so soon? She released a trembling breath. "Nicholas, you show me so much kindness. You made me feel like I wasn't alone when my world fell apart. I'm scared to trust again. But I also can't deny how my heart skips when I'm near you." His eyes shone with hope. "I would never ask you to rush. I just want you to know that I'm here and that I see the amazing person you are." Time seemed to slow around them. Tessa swallowed hard, looking at the gentle determination in his face. Something inside her said to take the leap. She might still have scars, but she did not want to let fear control her. She took a step closer, her eyes drifting to his lips. "That means the world to me," she whispered. Then softly she leaned in. Nicholas met her halfway, their lips grazing in a tender, cautious kiss. For Tessa, it felt like a tentative sunrise after a long night. Her heart pounded with both fear and excitement, but as his arms slid around her, she realized how safe she felt. Safe, cherished, and wanted. They broke apart gently, staring at each other in the quiet room. Tears shimmered in Tessa's eyes, not from sadness, but from relief. She had taken a step forward into unknown territory, yet it felt right. In Nicholas's arms, the memory of her shattered wedding was overshadowed by this new promise of hope. Ghosts returned, though the blossoming connection between Tessa and Nicholas brought renewed joy. It also made Tessa uneasy in ways she could not fully explain. She sometimes woke in the middle of the night, haunted by dreams of John leaving her at the altar. The old fear of being abandoned again gnawed at her thoughts. She was afraid to lose Nicholas if she was not enough to hold his interest. One morning, these worries swelled when Linda mentioned a rumor she heard about John asking around for Tessa's new address. "He seems determined to find you," Linda said gently, concern lacing her voice. "I just thought you should know." Tessa's stomach dropped. She had already told John she needed space, but clearly he was not giving up. The last thing she wanted was more drama. She had no intention of returning to him, but the fear of an ugly confrontation weighed on her. She confided her anxieties to Nicholas. He listened, brow furrowing with protective concern. "He has no right to harass you." "I can talk to him if that would help," he offered. Tessa shook her head, uneasy at the thought of a confrontation. "I can handle it if it comes to that," she said. "I just wish he would accept my decision." Nicholas put a comforting arm around her. "You're not alone. I won't let him cause trouble for you." Still, Tessa's nightmares persisted. She found herself withdrawing sometimes, afraid of letting her guard down too much, even with Nicholas. One evening, sensing her tension, Nicholas gently confronted her. "Tessa, you've been distant," he said, his voice filled with genuine concern. "Did something happen?" She wrapped her arms around herself. "It's just old fears creeping back," she admitted, tears forming. "I'm scared. You're everything I never knew I needed. What if you leave someday too?" His eyes softened. He stepped closer, taking her hands. "I understand that fear," he said gently. "But Tessa, I'm not going anywhere. I promise you." Tessa took a shaky breath. She wanted to believe him. She could see sincerity in his eyes. But betrayal leaves a deep mark. Slowly, she reached up and touched his cheek. "I want to trust that," she whispered. He leaned into her touch, resolve clear on his face. "One day at a time," he murmured. "We'll face the ghost together." As the months passed, Tessa and Nicholas grew closer, bonding over their shared work at the community center and the new layers of trust they built each day. Their relationship felt like a budding flower, carefully nurtured, neither wanting to rush. Tessa also began part-time classes to become certified to teach art, an endeavor Nicholas wholeheartedly supported. Just when life seemed stable, John reappeared in person. One afternoon, as Tessa left a local art supply store, she found him waiting outside, leaning against a street lamp. Her stomach lurched. "Tessa," he greeted, his tone guarded. "Can we talk?" She had no desire for another painful meeting, but she also did not want a scene on the sidewalk. With a stiff nod, she led him to a nearby bench. He looked at her with a sad, longing expression. "I won't lie. I still love you," John said, voice trembling. "I messed up. I know you might never forgive me, but I had to see you again, to hear you say it's truly over." Tessa bit her lip, looking at him carefully. Gone was the confident man who once charmed her. Now he seemed weary, haunted by regret. Part of her felt pity, but she could not forget what he had done. She inhaled slowly. "John, I understand you're sorry, but I can't be with someone who broke my trust that completely. I've worked too hard to rebuild my life." He rubbed a hand over his face, tears shining in his eyes. "Is there someone else?" he asked, voice hollow. Tessa hesitated, recalling the warmth of Nicholas's arms and the spark between them. She nodded. "Yes. And even if there wasn't, I can't go back to you. The damage is done." He swallowed hard, his shoulders sagging. "I see. I guess I have my answer." She stood, feeling both sadness and relief. "I wish you well, John. I hope you find peace. But I can't give you more than that." He nodded, blinking back tears. "I'm sorry," he said once more, voice raw. Then he turned and walked away, leaving Tessa alone on the sidewalk. A swell of emotions overtook her, grief for what was lost, but also a faint sense of liberation. She had truly closed the door on that chapter of her life. Now, she could finally move forward without guilt or uncertainty. The alley, revisited a day later. As Tessa walked home from the community center, she passed by the old church where she had been left at the altar. She paused, heart pounding. She had avoided this place since that night, but something compelled her to stop. The alley behind the building had haunted her dreams. That was where her life changed forever. She took a tentative step into the alley, memories flooding back, crying in a torn wedding gown, feeling the world collapse, and then the warmth of Nicholas's hug. The scars were still there, but as she stood in that shadowy place, she did not feel the same crushing despair. Instead, she felt a strange sense of gratitude. If she had not experienced that heartbreak, she might never have discovered her own resilience or found Nicholas. She closed her eyes and murmured a silent goodbye to the ghosts of that painful day. Opening them, she walked out of the alley with her head held a little higher. Not long after, Nicholas surprised Tessa with an invitation. He wanted her to accompany him to a formal charity gala he was hosting at a luxury hotel. The event would raise funds for the community center's after-school programs. Though Tessa felt nervous about dressing up for a fancy affair, especially after her disastrous wedding, she agreed. She saw it as a chance to celebrate their progress and the future of the kids they were helping. When the evening arrived, Nicholas picked her up from the guest house in a sleek limousine. He stepped out wearing a perfectly tailored suit, the city lights reflecting on his polished shoes. Tessa wore a simple but elegant gown she had found in a local boutique, her hair pinned up with a sparkling clip Linda had given her. As Nicholas took her hand to help her into the limo, she felt a flutter of excitement. At the hotel's grand ballroom, crystal chandeliers lit the space with a warm glow. Wealthy patrons mingled in groups, sipping champagne and discussing upcoming auctions. A live orchestra played soft melodies in the background. Tessa's heart pounded in her chest, but Nicholas stayed by her side, introducing her to various sponsors and supporters. She managed polite conversation, the swirl of sophisticated voices blending around her. Throughout the night, Nicholas cast her tender, reassuring glances. She sensed how proud he was to have her there, and it filled her with quiet confidence. When the dancing began, Nicholas led her to the dance floor, placing a steady hand at her waist. They moved in graceful circles, the music guiding them. Tessa looked up into his eyes, recalling their first embrace in that grimy alley. How far they had come, from a nightmare to this magical night. "You look radiant," Nicholas murmured, leaning down to speak close to her ear so she could hear him over the music. She smiled softly, resting her head against his shoulder. "I feel happy, truly happy." He pressed a gentle kiss to her temple. "Then I've done my job." As the song reached its crescendo, Tessa closed her eyes, letting the music wash over her. The pain of the past had not vanished, but it no longer weighed her down. In Nicholas's arms, she had found the courage to trust again. She had found hope. The evening continued with toasts and speeches, many of them praising Nicholas for his dedication to the community. Tessa listened, her heart swelling with pride for the man she was coming to love. By the time the gala ended, they had raised a record amount of donations. The after-party chatter was filled with excitement over the brighter future for so many children. Love unfolding several weeks later, life settled into a calm rhythm. Tessa continued teaching art at the center and studied for her teaching certification, while Nicholas balanced his business and charitable projects. Their relationship deepened, though they remained careful not to rush. Tessa wanted to build a lasting bond, founded on trust and understanding. Nicholas often took her to casual places rather than expensive restaurants, sensing her preference for comfort and authenticity. They shared late-night strolls along the quiet streets, or sat on the guest house porch gazing at stars, discussing their dreams. With each conversation, Tessa felt more certain that this was what real partnership looked like. Two people supporting each other's passions, offering gentle comfort on tough days, and celebrating triumphs, big and small. Nicholas invited Tessa to his private estate, a sprawling property outside the city. She had never been there before, and the sight of it took her breath away. Lush gardens surrounded a large, stately home. Elegant pathways led to secluded spots under ancient oak trees. They shared a walk through the moonlit garden, hand in hand. Tessa noticed how Nicholas appeared more relaxed in this serene environment, away from the demands of business and public events. At a small gazebo draped with climbing roses, he stopped, turning to face her. "Tessa," he began, his voice gentle. "I've been thinking about us, about where we've come from and where we might go." She felt a tremor of anticipation. His expression was calm but purposeful, illuminated by the soft glow of lanterns. He brushed a light kiss on her forehead. "We met under the worst circumstances, a moment of heartbreak. But seeing your strength, your compassion, and your talent has changed me. I never knew I could feel this way again." Her eyes glistened with emotion. "Nicholas, I feel the same. You helped me see that love can still be beautiful, even after pain." He smiled, a rare vulnerability in his gaze. Then, slowly, he knelt on one knee, taking a small box from his pocket. Tessa's heart nearly stopped. "I know we've both been hurt in the past," he said softly, opening the box to reveal a simple but stunning ring. "I don't want to scare you, and I respect if you need more time. But you're the one I want to spend my life with. Marry me, Tessa, not because of what happened before, but because of the love we share now." Tessa stood, her emotions whirling. Love, fear, joy, and disbelief. She remembered the day John proposed, how excited she was, and how that dream ended. Yet this moment felt different. Nicholas had proven himself through his steady presence, his respect for her boundaries, and his gentle heart. Tears blurred her vision as she looked into his eyes. "Yes," she whispered, voice catching. "Yes, I'll marry you." Relief and joy spread across Nicholas's face. He slipped the ring onto her trembling finger. Standing, he gathered her into a warm embrace. "I promise I'll never leave you," he murmured against her hair. Tessa's tears streamed silently, a mixture of happiness and the ghost of old wounds finally releasing. She clung to him in the moonlit gazebo, her heart full, her spirit free. The wedding of hope, word spread quickly among their closest friends and family. Linda almost burst with excitement, calling it a miracle of fate. Tessa's parents were initially worried about their daughter rushing into another marriage, but once they saw Nicholas's devotion and Tessa's genuine happiness, they threw their support behind the union. With a deep desire for simplicity, Tessa and Nicholas planned a small ceremony in the guest house garden, the place where Tessa had first begun to heal. The date was set for a gentle spring afternoon, not too far in the future, but allowing enough time for thoughtful preparations. On the morning of the wedding, Tessa woke up early, heart pounding with a mix of excitement and lingering nerves. Her mother and Linda helped her get ready. She chose a modest ivory gown with lace sleeves, nothing too extravagant, but elegant in its own way. As she looked in the mirror, her mind flashed back to her previous wedding dress, left crumpled on a guest house floor. Today, though, she felt strong and sure. When she arrived at the garden, a small group of loved ones stood waiting among flowers and ribbons. Nicholas stood at the makeshift altar, dressed in a tailored suit, watching her approach with glowing eyes. He looked both calm and elated, the corners of his mouth lifting in an affectionate smile. Tessa's heart soared. This time, she had no doubt the groom would stay. She walked down a short aisle, her father at her side, tears shining in his eyes. Soft music played as Tessa joined Nicholas, slipping her hand into his. The officiant, a local pastor from the community center, welcomed everyone in a gentle voice. Tessa and Nicholas exchanged vows that they had written themselves. Each word was honest and full of respect for the journeys that led them here. Nicholas vowed to stand by Tessa through every storm, to protect her heart as if it were his own. Tessa promised to be his partner in all things, to cherish his kindness, and share in his dreams. Their eyes never wavered from each other, and in those vows, the past pains melted away. When the officiant pronounced them husband and wife, a soft cheer rose from the small gathering. Nicholas leaned in, pressing a tender kiss to Tessa's lips, sealing the promise. The guests applauded, tears and smiles blending together. Later, at a modest reception in the same garden, they shared laughter and cake under the open sky. The children from the community center performed a small play they had prepared, delighting the newlyweds. Tessa's heart swelled, joy radiating from every corner of her being. Embracing the future that night, Nicholas and Tessa retreated to the guest house once more, but this time as husband and wife. The place where she once found refuge after being abandoned was now the setting of her new beginning. Under the soft glow of lamplight, Nicholas wrapped Tessa in his arms. She gazed at him, still hardly believing that she had gone from heartbreak to this precious moment of happiness. Their lips met, gentle and sure, a promise of all the tomorrows they would share. The memory of her tears in the alley no longer brought pain, but a reminder that sometimes the worst moments of our lives lead us to the best things we could never have imagined. Tessa had thought her story was over that night. Instead, it was the start of something far more beautiful. They closed the door on the past and looked forward to a lifetime of love, trust, and shared dreams. Together, they turned heartbreak into hope, proving that even a bride left crying in an alley can find her way to a love that holds firm, no matter how fierce the storms of life may rage.